will be leading this particular session on mid and late season pest management for day neutral strawberries, which again just follows a pretty important theme that we've been following all day. Enjoy some oysters. Oh yeah, yeah. That's what we do.
Something had to crash it. Just 1 second. Sorry about that. Taking about 30 seconds.
On the backs of your chairs, again, if you notice that WSU, we're always trying to improve what we do. And again, we always encourage your surveys at the end of the sessions and what you're hearing today and listening to. And if you put in your reviews, there's probably an excellent chance that you will receive a Woods coffee card. So please go ahead and make sure that you do take a moment to put in your reviews.
We're good. Looks away.
So again, yeah, I think we have time now. Julie Pond on mid-late season pest management for day neutral strawberries.
Okay, thank you. I am going to put on my integrated pest management consultant hat now. I work part-time. Uh-oh.
Technical difficulties. If you want to.
I work part-time for the Northwest Berry Foundation and then part-time for Purebell Crop Management. So I've been doing integrated pest management consulting for the last 10-ish years. And so I am going to give you a little bit of a predominantly Oregon perspective, but it definitely relates to day neutral production here, giving you some mid to late season pest management that we're finding concerns of in day neutrals. So it's really important to think about day neutral production season as an extremely long season. When you're comparing it to something like a June bearing season that's really short, half of these insects don't even really have any game in June bearing production. But that's where integrated pest management really comes into play. When you're looking at a day neutral production, you really need to look at biological, cultural, as well as chemical controls to manage that length of season, because it's that much more of a concern. So thrips, lygus bug, spotted wing Drosophila, even two-spotted spider mite all have just a different, have a different perspective or a different spin in day neutral production. So a couple comments here to start off with. A lot of the threshold recommendations or other recommendations for treatment thresholds come up from California information and BC information. And so thresholds really have a tendency to be different in whatever region that you're in. And if you're following them to the letter, it tends to lead to overtreatment and more problems with disruption caused by insecticides. There's going to be a lot of variability in pest management practices. So, differences between farms of how they have, what markets that they're selling to, and the thresholds based off of that. The growing approach, field size, field age, all of those things factor in. One of the main things to think about, though, is actions for these pests really needs to be done before the damage is visible. So either you're looking at routinely scouting the field to get some type of advanced warning and know what you're looking out for, or have some type of preventative measures like a calendar-based program for your management otherwise. Obviously, natural controls on a potential plant or pest species tend to be disrupted by insecticides that have been applied for a separate secondary pest. So secondary pest outbreaks tend to happen and are fairly likely. At the end of the day, I can't stress this enough, especially with such a long season that day neutrals have. You need to rotate chemistries all season long. You think that you have an issue now with trying to manage these insects and rotating through the season, but think of how much more of a problem you're going to have if you are noticing resistance showing up in these pests. It's a totally different ballgame. Lygus bug in California, for example, spotted wing Drosophila is also a problem. So we need to be thinking about that at the very beginning of each season and throughout it. So let's get into some detail here. Thrips, these are tiny little critters. They're yellow tan colored. They have wings. They move usually through wind though. They overwinter as adults in the plant base in the detritus. They cause misshapen blossoms. Typically, you'll see more of a bronze fruit appearance due to them sucking on floral cells. The lifespan or the life cycle can happen within 2 weeks. So you think of that over a full day neutral production season, and you've got multiple generations in a season. And the other thing too, I'm referring, usually what I'm finding is the western flower thrips. And there's hundreds of hosts for this particular insect. So movement from host to host to host in a season is extremely common. The biological, cultural control side of things, beneficial insects, though there's not as much research done on this, minute pirate bug, lacewing, they factor into suppressing the population a bit. There's the thought of adding an alternate host to the perimeter of a field, around the field, but when you're thinking about it from a day neutral production standpoint, you really want to make sure that that bloom that's happening with that alternate host lasts much longer than the full production and post-harvest of your day neutral field, which can be really difficult. Cool and wet weather typically suppresses populations, and there's been some research done on reflective mulches, grays or whites or silver colored mulches for planting into, because it interferes with the ability for thrips to locate the plants and the flowers. So this, and I've read a little bit of research here, but this seems to be something that is more applicable to a younger field, because by the second season, the plant canopy is pretty much taking over more than 50% of that plastic mulch. So you're not going to have the same benefits as when the canopies are still small and there's a lot of mulch visible to do that job. I want to point this out a little bit. There's no hard research that I'm pulling up here with regards to minute pirate bug, but this past season, scouting through a few strawberry fields, I noticed that flowers that had this little tiny insect here, and you can see a couple of thrips up along here, that's minute pirate bug. And when you saw these insects within bloom, I would easily count half the amount of thrips on those blooms versus other blooms right next to it that would have double the amount. So it was fairly consistent through the season. Of course, the insecticides that we're using to manage thrips or SWD or Lygus bug did bring this population down as well. But in general, and again, the farm that I was on, had a fairly intensive integrated pest management program. And so over time, you definitely could see multiple times where this population was reestablished. So, so that was something interesting that I noticed. Chemical control wise, again, talking about thresholds in Oregon, I've seen, growers basically be okay, relatively speaking, with 15 thrips per flower. But in California, usually that's closer to 7 before management, thresholds happen. So this is difficult to manage. So obviously monitoring this insect through the season is important, as I've said. Using a yellow sticky card out there to attract the thrips to it. Shaking flowers onto a light colored surface to see how many thrips come off of the flower. I also have, been able to count them with a hand lens by just directly on the flower. I pull off a bloom, one of the petals, and then count, clockwise around that point again to just get a, just average number of thrips per bloom that way in a site. Pesticide options, obviously choosing the most insect-specific, least toxic route. But, contact insecticides, pyrethrin, spinosades, those are usually fairly good at suppressing thrips. Moving on to lygus bug. This is a little bigger of an insect. It's pretty distinct, brown, usually brown colored, found in the fields, or light green colored as well. But that really distinct triangular V on the top of the back is pretty good marking for looking at it. It overwinters as adults as well. Both the adults and nymphs feed on the buds, blooms, and small fruit. They will usually puncture and suck the cells out of the seeds, and then the fruit cells behind those seeds typically will start to pucker and cause, misshapen fruit or cat-faced fruit. I have actually a picture of that in the next slide. There's usually 3 generations a year. That's between June and September. This is a picture of a nymph here, and you can see those really distinct, well, you can't really see, this isn't a great picture. Obviously, photography is not my area of interest, but there's little black dots on this nymph. They're extremely fast-moving insects. And so with that, and in addition to the fact that they do have multiple host species as well, this population's ability from moving with one host finishing up to the next host is really significant. So from the biological, cultural control perspective, beneficial insects, parasitoid wasps, damsel bugs, minute pirate bugs, spiders, all have the ability to suppress particularly the nymph stage since it doesn't have wings. But I really can't stress this enough. You need to, as best as possible, because not everybody has, fields adjacent to theirs being their own, but try and refrain from planting around fields with alternate hosts around. So clover, definitely a big no-no. Vetch, bean, these. So this is an example here. This photo is taken last summer. The adjacent field here is clover, and this is a first-year plasticulture Albion field. I within a week, this field went from no lygus bug to this clover field being harvested, and within that week's time, I was seeing 7 or 8 adults per blossom. They were aggregating into this field. I mean, it was like you blink your eye and they're there. So really think about that. And I mean, if it's a matter of you monitoring kind of the progress of that clover field, and really getting a game plan so that you could be prepared for what may be happening coming up into your strawberry field is definitely a must. Some organ production, or organic production rather, use bug vacuums to suck up the lygus bugs. So obviously if you have the equipment for that, that might be a good possibility to use. But please don't do cover crops or between row cover crops of clover or something like that between your plasticulture fields. That's mayhem. Chemical controls. So this threshold usually is when the first adult is found, particularly in the first generation, or when you're finding one adult or nymph per 20 plants. Again, managing by scouting this field, these fields often enough, and thinking about what other applications that you've made make a little bit of a difference. When you're monitoring the initial nymph population, it helps you gauge when the adults are going to appear. So sweep netting through the season. Also, I don't know, I guess I've, scouted enough that I can literally go through and before disturbing a plant area and not blinking, I can watch to see once I disturb the plant, what's moving around. But you have to be on it. I mean, these things move, like I said, as soon as you blink, they're like gone and you haven't noticed them. Some degree day modeling has been pulled together for managing this. That's more of first generation type of control. When you have multiple generations starting to overlap each other, the degree day models aren't as effective. Pesticide wise, again, the young nymph stage is a little easier to manage. Contact insecticides like bifenthrin and malathion are labeled for this. And insect growth regulators like Rymon are helpful in early season to manage the initial thrip populations as well. Spotted wing Drosophila, I really don't feel like I need to talk about this too much, but it has damaging potential in day neutral production. It's a vinegar fly type, and it hones in on ripening fruit. The males have black spots on the tip of each of their wings. Females have the ability to lay hundreds of fruit, or eggs rather, in ripening fruit rather than overripe fruit. And this is because they have a saw-like ovipositor that they are able to use by puncturing. They also have a 3 to 4 week lifetime. So when those eggs are laid, the larvae that come out of those feed for about 5 to 7 days, usually, before pupating. So this means that there are plenty of generations happening by the end of the season. They overwinter as adults, usually going into kind of a diapause. And then the populations move from, as the production, especially with fruit, on your farm is happening. So culturally, there's, high risk, low risk, and, shades of gray in between all of this. But from a low risk perspective, if you're going into a season that you've just went through hard winter freezes, the chances of having that population die back over that winter are really high. So that lowers your risk right away. Of course, things like, the 2018 season, the previous winter was nice and mild. And so we saw that pressure building much quicker in 2018 than we did otherwise. Before July, typically has a little less of a risk. So we don't as often have this problem in June strawberry production. Temperatures above 80 Fahrenheit, the females are not able to reproduce as quickly. But any of the temperatures that are below 80 consistently, they love those conditions. They love to multiply in those conditions. anything that's low humidity, dry, exposed, and again, that is to the advantage of a strawberry because usually they're pretty exposed fruit to the sun every day, and so that lowers the risk. But then you get into a overhead irrigated or wet humidity, high humidity, or under hoop houses later into the fall, or fruit being shaded tend to boost up that risk a little bit. Chemical controls of this, you guys have all heard about this, but again, like this varies year to year. Putting some traps out in the beginning of the season to see what we're working with to start the season is helpful. I swear these adults love to party or something, because the amount of red wine and apple cider vinegar that we use in a growing season to put into these traps, I'm sure the people that think that we're buying this bulk think that we're all alcoholics or something. But it is an effective attraction for the adults. When the fruit starts coming on, there's a salt solution that you can use. It's 1 cup of salt to 1 gallon of water. Putting a representative sample of ripening fruit in every week, and then basically letting it sit in there for a couple hours wiggles the larva out of the fruit so that you can assess what's going on in the field that way. Again, many generations in the season, so it obviously, the later in the season, the lower the management threshold. Bifenthrin, malathion, spinosad, spinetotrem, all have effective uses for managing this. But I do think that there needs to be fruit sampling that's happening on a weekly basis to make sure that your management is effective. That's really, really important for this. Last insect here, 2-spotted spider mite. I mean, this is all pretty basic at this point. 8 legs, they have the 2 characteristic spots. They overwinter as adults. Populations are going to explode usually during dusty, dry, hot conditions. So again, that plays more into day nurture production because the time of year is typically with those conditions. They're found on the underside of leaves, usually starting with the older leaves, and they usually have webbing that they kind of migrate in and out of laying their eggs. So culturally and biologically, these are usually more susceptible to having infestations when there's an earlier season or a young planting. Usually younger plantings, I tend to notice it a little bit more, but not always. And of course, this is like a common thing for flare-ups to happen because of management of another insect that you're trying to look after within a field. This is almost the usual thing that happens, is the 2-spotted spider mite flare up at that time. So one of the main things that I would suggest is following the predator mite populations as well as the 2-spotted adult and egg populations each week or as you're able to. So the other thing too is you do have access to purchase, predator mites or lady beetle populations and release them early in the spring so that they can boost up their generations by the time, 2-spotted are there to, they're able to compete at that point. So chemical management wise, you're inspecting the older leaves, like I'd mentioned, with a hand lens. The threshold on the Pacific Northwest Insect Management Guide, it talks about 20 to 25 adults per leaf is the threshold. And that seems, there's a lot of other things that are dependent on that. And that seems fairly low to me. The ratio of mites to predators that you're finding factor in to making this decision. And the adult versus egg count. If you have no real eggs showing up, but plenty of adults, the risk is a little bit lower than if you had, many more eggs found on there, because that cycle is rolling. So keeping that in mind, as well as weather conditions that I talked about earlier. So and secondary pest outbreaks. So several miticides are labeled for use here, but really you want to know what mode of action or what form of this insect you're needing to target, because some of these are labeled for only 2 applications a season. And so if you want to be, only using this for adults, which you have the majority of in the field at the time, that's going to be a little different of a product than when you would use if you want to get rid of the eggs as well. So just thinking of it from that perspective. So with that, I'll end there. And I do want to mention, like I did earlier, about the Fresh Market newsletter. This is sent out quarterly. It's for strawberry related projects that we've been doing. I know that we have a grower trial. So, and that also, there'll be plantings happening in Washington this year. So there'll be some information coming up on that, as well as the Oregon trials that are happening there. You can go ahead and sign up by either sending me an email or typing this little URL in and filling out the form to submit. But I do want to thank the Washington Specialty Crop Block Grant that we've been using as part of this workshop today. So I can open it up for questions if you guys have any. I think I have a few minutes left. I don't know. Question?
Thanks. Hi, Julie.
Hi, Tracy.
Just a couple questions about spotted wing. You mentioned a wine vinegar bait. Can you tell us what the ratio is?
It's 50-50, and we, it's Carlo Rossi red. It's a white wine. It's a white wine. Sorry.
It's a white
It's a white wine. My bad. I'm sorry.
It's easier to see. Yeah.
And yeah, so 50-50 ratio of that with apple cider vinegar. But you want to make sure, of course, that the apple cider vinegar is actually made with apples and that it's not corn-based ingredients, which is difficult. It's tricky to find, actually.
Second question is, what traps do you use?
We use, what's the brand name of the trap that we use? I can get you that information.
And it's a little bit larger.
I don't know what what they're selling it as the brand name of it.
Actually, we've gotten them custom made by Henry Winkler, I believe is his name. But obviously it's not a regular commercial trap, but it's very close to the one you guys originally started out with. Yeah. We adjusted the whole size some in the size of the overall thing, but it probably isn't the overall recommended trap, as this isn't the overall recommended mix, but we're keeping things consistent over the years. So we're sticking with this system until something really much superior. But we do test the new attractants and other things that come out to kind of calibrate them to our system. But there's lots of variability on trapping systems.
So maybe if anybody has one last question, it looks like I only have a minute left. Anybody else? Okay, thank you.